Hey everybody, it is DB After Dark. This is going to be our second go at it. First couple of times we had some weird issues with computers and such and getting sick. I am joined by my co-host L Deeds.
How you doing, DB?
I'm doing good. I'm glad you're in studio. This will be a pretty free flowing show, I guess, because we have been really busy and yeah, we'll probably just kind of go over some random topics and talk about things. I know, one of the big issues is still this Brexit thing going on, and we can talk about that and what it means. Earlier in the show, with the anti-media that just went on, we talked a bit about Brexit and essentially how the mass media is going against it, and what would that basically means is probably a good thing for the people. What do you think?
Well, I've picked up on the narrative, obviously, that you're referring to, which is that wanting out of the European Union makes Europeans, especially Britons, racist. I find it to be a repudiation of globalism, personally. I've seen, of course, the statistic, I think Anti-Media published today, 57% rise in hate crimes in the past 72 hours. I'm curious where that number comes from and how it's quantified. Do you have any insight on that, DB?
Yeah, I'm sure that they are getting, reports from Scotland Yard or wherever the police are getting, basically eyewitness accounts are saying people are, yelling racial epithets at people or essentially targeting people for not being British enough, not looking like they're a white British. There was an article earlier about a guy he was Pakistani, but he was born in London, so he had a complete London accent. He did not speak the language. He was Muslim, but he was like, "Man, I'm as British as it gets. Like, I pay taxes. I don't sit on the dole. I have my own business, blah, 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 blah." And still I was yelled at and people threw rocks at me and things like that. That was a story I read earlier, and it was them saying that it wasn't like a rise in any of these sentiments among the British people. Is more like, how the Trump effect is going on essentially in the U.S., where people feel emboldened. And in Britain, there's maybe not that for lack of a better word, that thug element that would actually attack these people. Like we saw Trump supporters in Anaheim or whatever get beaten down. You remember that, El?
I recall some really vivid visuals of young women of color being shoved by old men in veterans' uniforms. I'm not sure what exact episode of ugliness you're referring to. I'm sorry.
Oh, it was essentially this rally Trump couldn't even have because they blocked the freeway. He tried to have a rally in like Pasadena or something, and then in Anaheim, there was this infamous scene of this blonde girl that got egged and got pushed around by a bunch of guys, and people were waving Mexican flags around and stuff like that. So of course, all the super right wing people jumped on that, and they're like, "Oh, go back to your country." And of course, it's bad eggs on both sides because it's hard to really support anybody who's a Trump supporter, except for the fact that he appears to be anti-establishment. But I can promise you, he's not anti-establishment because he's made his money within the system and he's gone bankrupt. I don't know how many times, like 4 or 5 personally, and how many times his company has to protect assets. And still, the guy I read somewhere is not even worth, much more than $1 billion, although he claims to be worth 5. And he's just one of these guys that he's a snake oil salesman.
Oh, there's no doubt about that, DB. The dangerous thing about him, of course, is that he has a certain amount of comedic timing. So the hateful things he says, they're amusing to a degree. But I wanted to ask you actually about something I haven't heard touched on, which is this idea that maybe he was allowed to win. He's allowed to become the front runner. Do you have any insider thoughts about the idea that they gerrymandered the outcome into his favor?
Oh, for the GOP, no doubt, because you can see conservatives like the Bushes don't support him. So I don't know what facet he represents, except that he's like a plant for the Clinton camp, and the Clinton camp's like some other branch of this same warmongering neocon, which is neoconservative, meaning new conservatives. They mask themselves, either under like these overtones of religious piety and morality, like the Bush era GOP, which turned out to be a complete farce. And then you had this empty suit in Obama, who everybody fawns over because why? I don't know. Maybe because we haven't had the big war under his watch. Maybe because he couldn't accomplish that. And that Nobel Peace Prize, maybe it stopped him. I don't know. But it freaks me out more to think about Hillary, like honestly, because with 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 Trump, you're just going to have an incompetent guy who's going to be run essentially by whoever his handlers are. But with Clinton, you're getting the real deal as far as like an Evita Peron. It's just crazy.
Um, we're going to sit here like the choir singing to each other tonight. I can see that. So I wanted to ask you actually about the timing, speaking of Secretary Clinton, of these quote unquote investigations, which seem to be ending not with bangs but whimpers today, this week. Obviously, Benghazi has finally concluded their multi-million-dollar investigation, pointing out what we knew already from what I can tell. And I'm about 100 pages deep into Huma Abedin's deposition. Have you taken a look at any of these materials?
I haven't had a chance, except that things keep leaking that are big stories. I was reading earlier about how now Bill is going to start being implicated in things they're digging up, and for the longest time, it was a matter of having a staff doing this. But I apparently, what was it? Guccifer was saying that they're able to not only hack but collate. So they're going to be able to pull out juicy tidbits based on keywords. And I don't know if you saw anything about that, because as I can see, you're kind of looking at these massive documents over here that are hard to pick through. Wouldn't it be great if a computer could just tell us what the heck we're looking at? Because these are like thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. But no, I haven't had a chance besides just seeing some of the connections with, I know the Saudi royal family has been a big one, especially with direct implication in the Clinton Foundation, and then them getting like 4 or 5 billion in additional arms sales.
Wait, is this in the Benghazi report or is this in Guccifer's findings?
This is Guccifer's.
And there's no doubt in your mind that that's valid.
Yeah, because the smoking gun stuff there with the money transfers and stuff. So, I mean, at this point, we have people that are essentially untouchable unless either the people en masse can like just be persuaded that this stuff is actually real because there's this paper trail, and they would rise up. I don't know if maybe the military would support the people if they try to crack down on them. I suppose it all comes down to whether or not we actually are still armed as a populace. I think that's why that's become the new Jim Crow. I was seeing an article today about how they're going to start persecuting people that are pro-gun in the media, as essentially being a threat to us because anyone could crack at any time. And you have to tie it into this grand scheme of where if there is a collapse of some sort and societal dissent follows, and if we're all armed, we actually might have a chance to take back this country. If we're not, then they're going to do whatever the heck they want to us.
Now, when you're talking about the disarming of Americans, I presume you're referring to that bit of political theater staged by the Democrats last week. There was no result. So what alarm bell are you exactly ringing right now?
I just feel that they, when they politicize mass shootings and use them to push agendas. And the other thing that always strikes me is the actual locations of these events, where they take place, who's targeted, what the locations are, which are almost always the most unassuming and gun-free of zones possible, almost to show like, hey, these things are going to happen to the most vulnerable people of society, essentially the non-combatants, the true civilians of our population are being killed and targeted systematically. I mean, I've seen a video of a man who was able to load an AR-15 and a sidearm, which I believe the guy had a 38 or a 40 caliber, semi-automatic, but he was able to pop off enough rounds theoretically to have created that huge level of casualties, but it would have taken somebody with massive skill, which the guy could have had because he was actually Omar Mateen actually was a contracted mercenary, so he was highly trained, and it's possible he could have done it solo. That being said, there were numerous eyewitnesses that said he at least had a helper, if not another one. I mean, I've tried to research it, and they've scrubbed a lot of that stuff, but there was definitely eyewitnesses that said multiple shooters. So to me, that's not a lone guy who they're pushing this different narrative now of that he was gay and had been scorned by people, or he had something against the Latinos at that club because they abused him or used him. Had you heard anything about that at all?
I have to admit, the last bit of, and I won't call it research I did about that man, was pointing in the direction of he was a self-hating homosexual who was raised with, certain values which told him his own existence was vile and abhorrent. And I found that narrative to be believable based upon what the Young Turks chose to share on that particular day. Of course, if you buy that, you have to also buy the lone gunman theory.
And it's very difficult to believe because, as we've seen so many times before, we'll see similar looking people in the back of these videos. I mean, people that they've picked out as being crisis actors. So the media can portray it any way they want, and that's the whole disaster of modern corporate media. We don't know if what we're seeing is true or false, or if it's reenactments, or if it's green screens. We don't know for sure if so-called eyewitnesses are credible or if victims are real. In the world as it is today, you can double-check things, but things can also be fabricated on a grand level, especially visually. So, it always strikes me as odd from a taking conspiracy theorist angle that they would push for legislation in Florida and not get anywhere, and then go with this sit-in because Florida's a red state. They're not going to give up guns. No red state will ever give up guns, and that's the truth. And the Midwest probably won't either. So you got the East Coast and you got the West Coast. You'll disarm, and the Pacific Northwest. And me and Nick have brought this up on Anti-Media a bunch of times. Where why is it always those coasts they're trying to disarm? What's the grand scheme of why are they always trying to pass legislation for New York and California? Like, are these entry points where they're going to open the gates and let in these foreign powers to essentially quell any uprising when people find out just how heinous things really have been and the economy just kind of falls apart?
I'm so sorry. I don't know. I suppose we're going to be invaded on the coasts. Is that sort of the direction you're going in with this gambit? We want to be.
Yeah, I mean, just from strictly a logical perspective of if you're thinking that these things are being manipulated, it's not to say that mass shootings don't happen. I mean, you can use Australia as that 800-pound gorilla in the room where they passed a couple laws in the 80s and essentially stopped mass shootings there. But we're not the same animal as Australia. Australia provides people with a high quality of life because they're socialized, and they do it in a way that they've been doing it for, oh God, how long has the Commonwealth had the social contract? I mean, we're talking about like 100 years. I mean, post World War I or something, it was hammered out and spread to the colonies, which is Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the Commonwealth. So in India until it broke off, but it was stating that we can disarm our population, and we can do it with things that set them up so that they can't fail and prevent any. Could you imagine Australians uprising against their government? Like, I could never imagine those people because they have health care, they have college. Their minimum wage is like $18 an hour. And if they can't get it, they can go on assistance until they can find a job. And if they're on assistance, they make $18 an hour. So they get paid like a 40-hour work week.
Right, but Australia is the deadliest place on earth, and life expectancy is about 17 years. So you're not actually taking a lot out of the system if you're going to be requiring that kind of support.
Very, very true. Very true. I mean, you make a good point. They do have spiders the size of, I don't know, hubcaps. Yeah, hubcaps.
Yeah, that's the standard of measure I like to think about a lot.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just, it's becoming a part of the nomenclature of our corporate media culture that guns are bad, and they push a lot of agendas of just strictly control. I mean, I was reading an article by Zygmunt Brzezinski, which we've talked about before, about how he's an unsung puppet master. Many people may know of him and read his book, and he wrote a great book, The Grand Chess Game or something, or Chessboard. It was a geopolitical masterpiece. I remember reading it for political science class and thinking, wow, how cold and calculating the people at the top are, and they just move assets around and try to essentially grab natural resources. What's been going on since the end of World War II was that there was never like this definitive winner. Like, the U.S. didn't win. It won in the sense that we weren't invaded, but we lost in the sense that we gave our economy up.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I have to interrupt you because the post-war economy is understood and witnessable as the golden age for the American economy. If that wasn't victory, I don't know what was. Now, if you're talking about NAFTA and other agreements that came out of the 80s that gave away our economy later, we can call that a Pyrrhic victory that lasted a generation, but we cannot say we lost the Second World War. I object. I object.
I don't know, because you can argue that the 50s was the golden era.
Well, I'm talking about the economy for those in the right place at the right
Sure.
time. I mean,
Sure. I don't know, though, because a lot of people said, in the 1900s, at the very beginning of the modern era, there was more freedom and less government than the 50s, and you still had many modern conveniences like electricity, and you had cable car, and you had steamboat, things like that. But yeah, that's going down a totally different rabbit hole. Well, I'm not saying we lost. This is what I think might have happened. I think, obviously, we had to split a hemisphere with Russia. That we came to some sort of agreement where, because of their help, their debt, basically our debt to them could never be repaid. They gave up an insurmountable amount of men to the war. A generation. Yeah, exactly, a generation. And as a result, it would be unfathomable, and the American people could never stomach fighting Russia right after World War II, even though they were really the only threat left, essentially. So there's a lot of controversy about what went down essentially with Germany, with Japan, and how they were beat. And there's many different ways of looking at it, because Japan did take our economy over after World War II. And we did rebuild them after we dropped the bombs. And we sent in Marines who died from radiation poisoning, rebuilding after those bombs. So somebody was made somebody's bitch by something after that war. And we didn't officially sign a peace treaty with them until 1952. And you can look that up. Now, Germany, we steamrolled because Russia took all those casualties. We steamrolled them. We never found Hitler's body. We never found anybody of any real importance. They were already way long gone. They were long gone a long time ago to Argentina and places much further south. And there's a lot of stories about that, how they found caverns. And it's not like science fiction, like they dug under the earth, but they found natural caverns, and they had enough technology because they were the Third Reich that they could like build essentially a breakaway civilization, and they were able to do that. The top brass was never caught. I mean, even von Braun said he was a junior level scientist, and this was the guy that was the father of our nuclear program in the sense that he put it on rockets. So it was like a crazy, crazy time when you think about it that way. That we did win. Don't get me wrong, we did win, but we didn't dominate the whole world like we could have. Something stopped us. Maybe it was Russia. Maybe we didn't have any more people ourselves. Maybe we didn't have any more guys to throw at the war. I mean, how many people did we really lose in World War II? There's no way to tell because they don't count things like disease as a casualty of war. How many guys went over there and got sick in the jungles and died, and they never came back? And then look at also the spillover of the Korean War, which was really just World War II and a half, where it never ended, where the UN solidified as a fighting force, and we fought China that we actually liberated from Japan. So it was like this weird point where we were at this crossroads where we could have made this decision to take the high road and let China be what it was in the first place, which was the preeminent power of the East. And we just couldn't do it. I don't know if it's because of our ties with Britain and the whole opium wars, but we wouldn't leave well enough alone, and we went into Korea, and then we went into Vietnam. Another generation later, when we replenished all of our dudes and we had enough poor guys from the South to send to war, we had another war. And it's just crazy. Like, what are your thoughts, Elle?
You know, I'm a bit of a Pollyanna, but the longer I live and the more closely I'm paying attention, the more I have to admit I'm looking at this endless war as the major industry of our nation, now that we no longer build anything. I don't know that podcast and succinct go together, but
yeah, I mean we've talked at length about the '60s kind of being this the American industry's death knell. It was the beginning of the breaking up of these great unions that, let's be honest, Brexit is because of unions, because people are afraid of competing on a global level that will reduce their quality of living with no appreciable benefit to someone halfway across the world. It's not like the guy in India or in China or in Vietnam's going to make a living wage taking your job. They're going to be slave wages. They're going to be abused, and they're going to, all the worst things you could think of. I mean, we've talked about it even where we've tried to start changing our own habits about what we buy as far as like the shrimp from Vietnam, because they're from slave farmers, shrimp farmers that work like 18-hour days and make like 60 cents an hour. And the worst part about it is that they're working in an environment where the shrimp, they're eating the grossest stuff you can think of, and they're around that stuff. So they're just, I swear that they're pouring like sewage or something into this and feeding these shrimp the worst stuff you can imagine, because it's free or it's cheap, and that's the budget, and that's how they make their profit margin. And we've said, we got to make sure we can't eat that kind of shrimp. We can't, if you're going and buying bulk shrimp, tiger shrimp, stuff like from even Costco, if it's a product of like Vietnam or any country really where you can tell they don't have strong human rights, it's slave labor. Like, it is. So there's things we've been doing like that have been trying to affect change in a small way. And that's the power of the collective of the world now, with the internet still being pretty much open. I mean, yeah, there's something called the dark net, which a lot of people don't know about, which is when you go on Google, you're only getting what Google wants to show you. But if you put in like the actual address of the site you're looking for, and you know it, you can get into anywhere. So that's kind of like the dark web. Um, but yeah, what do you think? I mean, what are your thoughts on all that?
All that,
All that, you know what I mean?
the world
The
and what
world,
we've
the
made of
world at
it.
large.
Yeah, I think we've screwed it up pretty royally. We continue to do so. Um, yeah,
Anything you want to talk about? I mean, you've been involved in a million projects for somebody that you know is working out of their home office doing open the primary and then making your way out to Sacramento and going through the soul searching experience of going to Bernie conventions and getting a lot of I'm goods.
um, it has been a. I have to admit, there's been a period of exhaustion that's hit in the weeks following that adventure. It's only been a couple weeks since that all concluded, and as you may or may not know, Secretary of State Padilla was served with election fraud legal paperwork tonight. He was served. Now, where that will get us or what that will accomplish remains to be seen. Some of the Election Justice USA players, specifically Attorney Bill Simpich, who opened the primary, had some conversation with on many occasions. They're doing a presentation tomorrow night in California. If you look at Internets for Bernie Sanders or Election Justice USA, for that matter, you'll see the event announcement. Obviously, there's a lot of lawsuits around this election, and quite a few of them are aimed at California, trying to change what has already happened there. So there's I don't know which lawsuit they're going to be talking about exactly. I think it's Trust Vote. They issued an hour-long video a couple of weeks ago that people found pretty electrifying. The case they've been building, their decades of combined experience. There'll be an update on that. And if this serving of Secretary of State Padilla tonight was connected to that, I mean, I'll be sitting there with popcorn when it airs at 6:30 tomorrow.
There was a. Are we talking about election justice too? That was setting up a lawsuit to block the certification of these California votes because it's the massive fraud going on with the Bernie campaign, basically, essentially blackballing them. I mean, they took it out of the hands of the voters. They put it in the hands of the voters of the Democratic Party of the South to decide who is going to be the Democratic nominee. This is how stupid the primary system is that we put the states that don't vote Democrat ever in charge of who's going to be the Democratic. So essentially the Republican, meaning the neocon party, has it all wrapped up no matter what. Because if we're going to use all the South as the barometer for who's going to run, you're going to get neocon Hillary Clinton and buffoon neocon Trump. So either side doesn't matter. They win. The same people that run everything, which at this point just follow the money. Who makes the most money in the whole world right now every year? Top to bottom. Every single year, who makes the most money? Arms manufacturers of the U.S., specifically contractors, and their associated tentacles of mercenaries, the Defense Department itself, and all these ABC corporations, which LABC corporations are like the CIA, the FBI, the DHS, blah, 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 blah. They're all like not actually like specifically a part of the government because they're LLCs, so that when they can fuck up, they don't drag down everybody else with them because they're a private corporation. That's how they set them up. And especially Department of Homeland Security is not at all. It's what they call quasi-governmental. It's like the TSA. It's like the post office. The post office loses $2 billion a year. Who pays for that?
Half my mail, yeah.
Yeah. Who pays for that? We pay for that. Can we say we don't want the post office if we don't want to pay for them? Nope. Why? Why can we not? Why can we decide we don't want to use them when we mail a letter? it leaves only FedEx to do those mail envelopes, and then that's it, and you overpay. So they have a stranglehold. They're a monopoly. They're subsidized by the taxpayer. We both love the post office. We, in our own way, because really, when you think about it, they are cheap, but they're subsidized. They're subsidized by people that maybe. I mean, and honestly, look at all this junk mail with these the reduced postage rates. They're paying like 12 cents to mail you this big piece of crap in the mail of stuff you don't need, and you have to pay like 45 cents to mail a tiny letter.
Well, if we're talking about nonprofit mailings, I can tell you that as someone who has administrated for more than one nonprofit, achieving that reduced rate, someone's doing a hell of a lot of busy work to get that rate. You would not believe the labyrinthine documents, the specificity of these documents, the way the stamp has to be placed on the page. It's nonsensical. It's perfectly governmental.
Well, I surely wish that they would. If the U.S. Postal Service became American Letter Carriers Corporation, I would invest in them. If somebody like, I don't know, Richard Branson, who created Virgin Airlines out of thin air and sold it to Alaska for another $2 billion to pad.
He actually created that out of Virgin Records.
No, but I mean, he just bought a bunch of planes and made Virgin Airlines, which no one knew. He had, I know he had Virgin Records, but what I mean
My point is, if you're a billionaire to begin with, these things become possible out of thin air. Is that like $1 million loan from Trump's dad? Tell me more about how you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps.
he got a $200 million loan, is what I believe he got, which equates out to like $1 billion today. And I think he's worth around the same or maybe a little less. Somebody was saying that the guy, you can't really consider him a successful businessman, as he's essentially just held on to the fortune his father gave him. He hasn't grown it in a real way, and he hasn't become a multi billionaire. If he was a multi billionaire, like if he was closer to 10 billion like he said he is, he could just drop 50 or $100 million on his own campaign, but he didn't. He actually didn't really use that much money at all. And now with Hillary having $1 billion in her campaign coffers, which it's still up for grabs. I mean, we're going to the convention in 3 weeks, and she still doesn't have the necessary delegates. So all these people that they're quantifying for her that are super delegates, they're not counted for sure until we get there. And then if there's a split in the party, if there's a real split, say Bernie shows up when we're there and he says, you know what? Screw you, DNC. I'm going to start the Progressive Party, and splits it off and decides to run legitimate third party, and then maybe he pulls Jill Stein, or maybe he goes Tulsi, maybe he goes Nina Turner. He pulls some really great female candidate to nullify Hillary's whole vote by, sex thing she has going for her right now, which is ridiculous. What do you think?
When you said sex, I got distracted. So, I don't know. I'm sure that there must be some pretty ornate rules to... I say I'm sure. Forgive me for assuming. I'd be surprised if there aren't some pretty ornate rules in place, maybe being written as we speak, to prevent him from suddenly pulling a third-party run out of his hat in 3 weeks. I just would be surprised if that would be in his grasp if he plays by their rule book. I know that there does exist a way in which the people can inspire their individual states to amend the Constitution of the United States, which is maybe what it would require. I don't know if these Bernie-crats or burners have that kind of organizational capacity. And again, I'm sort of talking out of my neck. It's something that I read a few months ago. It does exist, and it's never happened in the history of the United States. Do you know what I'm referring to? Like a congressional amendment? No.
Yeah. It was done roughly 70 years ago, wasn't it, for FDR, who won under this contested convention where they had to do a revote among all delegates, but they didn't at that point have super delegates, which don't have to listen. That's what sucks. Is even if they did force a vote where the person of the district, meaning the representative, or even the senators, had to go back and look at how their states voted in the preliminary and side with them, side with the popular vote. That's how FDR won. FDR won the popular vote, therefore these delegates had to vote for him. And then he ended up becoming the most popular president of all time because of socialist populist policies. And it's different than classic socialism. Democratic socialism will not dip into all facets of the economy. What it would do is close to as Maslowian as you can get, meaning they're going to say, what do human beings need? And then they're going to decide how society will divvy up funds to pay for what human beings need. It's not going to be. Here's the thing: is it a waste of money to give somebody a free college education? Is it truly a waste of money? Say a total C student in high school gets through 2 years of free community college, barely. Just say they just barely get through it. But they get through it. They have their credits lined up. They're ready to go and jump into their 4-year degree at a big university where these professors, rightly so, are being paid maybe a couple $100,000 a year because they're at the top of their field. Thus, it drives up the tuition, blah, blah, blah. So we're talking about, if we're really talking about what it really costs versus the total inflation of bullshit that it is now, I still think an average student should be looking at about 10 to 15 grand a year. They're going to have to pay for college. So the question becomes, should we take a risk on people who are probably like borderline to go through college? Or should we be giving people that are, able to get through it and aren't going to be fringe candidates to get through college and get through a specialized degree and wasting those resources? That's just the first argument of being against democratic socialism, is there's going to be a waste element. But we already have that waste element multiplied by human suffering in the war industry, do we not?
Well, of course we do. And I think that the premise you just laid out ignores, as often that statement of the argument goes, it often leaves out the vocational schooling. No, we're not all cut out to be rocket scientists, but plenty of us can be damn fine electricians.
And one of the things, one of the challenges going forward is something we talked about earlier in the anti-media program, where we were talking about transhumanism, which is essentially this. It's a struggle we're going to see. It's crazy to think that, we're in our 30s and 40s, and we're going to see a time when people will be put out of work that have been done by men and women forever, will be done by a machine or a robot or a computer, and there's no going back from it. Like, one of the things we brought up tonight was there's 3.5 million truck drivers in the U.S. In 5 years, they're probably going to get phased out. Like, it's coming. Like, the Google self-driving car was just tested in an 18-wheeler in Europe, and it made it without a driver. And drivers in a truck driver in the U.S. makes on average, about 45, 50 grand a year. So that the hourly rate for them is right around $22 to $25 an hour. And these are people that, they do a hard job, and they're worth that money. Don't get me wrong. They're worth 50 grand a year. They do a hard job. They transport goods. They keep our economy going. And now they're obsolete. So one of the things Zoltan from the Transhumanist Party was talking about was a basic income, which was just shot down in Switzerland, actually. So I think people right now aren't ready to give away money to people just as a basic income. I think we're starting to see that as a reality. We don't want to have a big war where a lot of people die just so that our stupid economy can function. We don't need to have World War III to kill off half the planet and get rid of a bunch of people just so we can just keep the stupid system the way it is because it's a consumerist system and there's too many useless consumers now or whatever. We need to get past that point. We need to get to universal resource based, which states we have a finite amount of certain things. We can't make more than it. There's certain things in the world that we have to grow. We can't grow trees that fast. We can't grow rubber trees. We can't grow. There's a lot of things that don't just perpetually self regenerate. Now, the interesting thing is that I've heard oil, of all things, is actually not even close to being tapped, and that it's artificial right now that the supply is low. What do you think? Have you ever heard anything about that?
What, that we're not really running out of oil?
Yeah, that it's actually developed as a natural byproduct of the Earth's magnetic inner workings, which is like kind of like this interior hotspot or an interior sun, if you want to call it. And then there's this magma that keeps expanding, and that its product, when it combines with carbon, are these pools that seep up through the crust of the Earth. And there's literally oceans of this stuff. Now, we shouldn't be burning it because it gets trapped and it raises the heat, and then the Earth self-corrects. And that's not good for human life because when the Earth self-corrects, it creates ice ages. And those are cyclical on the Earth, but they're supposed to come every like 300 to 400 years, these little mini ice ages, and then every 3, 4, 5,000, these big ones. But that's being accelerated because we had our last mini ice age in the 1700s.
I think I saw that on Game of Thrones. Yeah, go on.
And so essentially we've been accelerating the mini ice age spectrum, and now we have so many people on the planet, and it would make any kind of migrationary pattern towards more temperate zones very difficult, if not almost impossible. And we're starting to see that. Like, there's places in the world right now where the climate's becoming uninhabitable. And it's ironic that some of it's through war, but there's some of it through climate too. And there's a lot of immigration and clashes of culture. And, you know, almost through necessity, people are having to leave their homelands. It's not like people from the Middle East or something want to leave and go somewhere where it's totally different and they're in an alien environment. It's like me and you, we wouldn't want to be forced to go over there if we didn't have to be. But if World War III broke out tomorrow and we were getting bombed and we could leave, we would probably go. And if we had to get far away, maybe we'd go to South America. We don't speak Spanish very well, and we would be like them. So you just got to put yourself in their shoes. What do you think?
And what, have empathy for the displaced peoples of the world? Of course. Are you drawing a line now back to Brexit? Are you making a circle?
Kind of, because you know, the main thing with Brexit is it's a reaction to policies from the same government that is now going to be put in control of a country that's cut off from the economy of the rest of the landmass that they have cultural and historical significance with, like France, like Germany, like the Netherlands and Brussels, even though it is over-domineering. But you know what? You see what happens right after Brexit. France and Germany have now decided they want to control all the other economies, all the other armies, all of their policies, all of their everything. They want to create this TTIP nightmare for who's left in the EU. I mean, this may create more Brexits. Italy may exit. Spain may exit before they suffer the wrath like Greece did.
And so they should.
Now, you have a friend in Italy you met, you know, through your activism. Had you ever had a chance to ask him about any of the economic issues going on with Italy? Because it's really, it's it's so telling that the Vatican, which is probably the single richest city-state that ever existed, is in the middle of a country that's having infrastructure issues and problems with keeping their pensioners paid.
Now, that's something I didn't know about. Although, of course, as you know, there's an issue with pensioners right here in America, where our retired and often ill and often elderly people who have labored for decades are now told at the end, sorry. So I wasn't aware that that was a factor in Italy. I can tell you that Ricardo is who you're referring to, has more than once said that he's living in a failed state, and has more than once said the reason why he was participating in this activism was to help head off that fate for us.
Well, one of the things I can see it was interesting because you met him because of Bernie Sanders. There's a lot of Australians for Bernie Sanders, and there's a lot of people around the world for him. And I remember reading a guy who described the U.S. as being this kind of monster globe with a giant mouth of razor sharp teeth and a bunch of tentacles and this single eyeball. And that single eyeball was Goldman Sachs, because it ran Wall Street, that ran all of our economic policies, which in turn shaped how we used our military, which at this point in the game, unless everything smoke and mirrors, is really far ahead of everybody else, to the point where maybe we can't be beaten even if everyone gangs up on us, and that they're trying to get people to fight us so they can take over more territory, and they're just being a bully. And that as the U.S. citizens, there's not a lot we can do because we're in this impending police state, and half the people, even more than half, are super, super, super asleep and can't wake up, refuse to wake up, keep going about life as it is. I mean, how many of us have people that are having a lot of children and having a home and acting as if business as usual and totally ignoring what's going on and thinking that the party's going to go forever and not really thinking about making a plan to, even me and you talk about this, like what were to happen if the grid went down? How'd you get water if the pump stopped? If you didn't have a well on your property, how could you survive past 3 days without water? Do you have enough bottled water saved up in your house? What if people come knock on your door and they want your water and they have guns and you don't have guns? Or even if you do, what if you only have like one or not enough people? I mean, this kind of crazy shit's happening in Venezuela right now.
Neighbors are killing each other over bottled water in Venezuela right now?
Well, there's riots. At the beginning of those riots, they're using the tactics to strong arm people. Now, thankfully, Venezuela is essentially rainforest. So they don't, I mean, it'd be tough for them to have a problem with water, but food, I mean, toiletries, toilet paper, I mean, things that you grow accustomed to and without, you start to feel a lot less human and a lot less dignified. And you realize that your country's sitting on top of this oil well that basically makes California run. I mean, many people don't know this, but the oil field in Venezuela goes through the Panama Canal over to California, and California is powered by Venezuelan oil. Okay? And that's a massive economy, Southern California and Northern California. The only parts of California that get oil from Alaska are way up north, like Eureka. They get the pipeline from the Northwest, but everything else is Venezuela. And we get a little bit from Mexico, but it's usually diesel. And so people see the hand of the CIA in Venezuela, and they see the government, Maduro, who's took over for Chavez, was his appointed successor for freaking clown puppet. He's heavy-handed these things. And meanwhile, Chavez's daughter's worth $4.2 billion, never worked a day in her life. She's 18 years old. She's living in this mansion.
Is she single?
I think she has a lot of girl and boyfriends. But at any rate, she's living a decadent life of an elite level, if you couldn't believe. I mean, the richest of the richest. I mean, of the women of the world for 4 billion, she must be top 10 of the women of the world's wealth. So she's living the life, and her people are in these queues for bread. They can't see the doctor, even though the doctor's free. There's no doctors. Doctors took off. Any of the doctors that were able, they left. They went somewhere else. You know, any other Spanish-speaking country they could get hired, they left. So you had a brain drain, which is going to happen in the U.S. probably, where if you can leave, you're going to leave because you're going to see this. You see what they're setting up. You know, you're seeing them setting up to make the people have such a hard time that they're going to either rise up. And trust me, even if we keep our guns, if we're stupid enough to start an uprising, the military would fight us, and then we'll lose. Whereas if the government fights us, the military would back us up, then we could win. There's a big difference. So we can't start anything. You know what I mean? We're in that conundrum.
Was there a lesson in what's happening in Brazil?
That's a good story. I mean, Brazil's so heavy-handed. So what's Brazil doing right now? They're clearing out favelas to get ready for the Olympics, which is coming in next year, next summer.
I thought it was like 5 weeks.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, it starts soon. So there's that, and they have the World Cup. That's what it is. The World Cup's coming in 2018. So they're knocking down favelas, which is where people that, you know, the problem with Brazil is what would happen. As much as people don't like to admit, that's closer to an anarchist type of system than you'd like to admit, because the central government has very little power except violence. That's all they can do, because the people there are very poor, decentralized. They're really only unified in that they're all like hustlers that are used to working on the black market, the black economy, because it has great natural resource, but it a very, very high level of corruption. And
Well, wasn't a democratically elected president just deposed by a faction of the government? Collusion with the media, is that right?
exactly, yeah. The democratically elected president was gotten rid of and deposed by a CIA type person who went in and immediately started giving up permits to Western companies to extract vital natural resources. And when we talk about natural resources, we're really talking about resources for what everybody thinks is geared up for the next and last war. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is they think that China and Russia will never go for what the people in the West want to do, and we're going to eventually have to fight both, or one at a time, or whatever, however it works. And Brazil, you know, they're not really a threat to the U.S., but with the amount of population they have, and they actually do have a military, they could, if they wanted, cause trouble in our own backyard. So they had to be controlled. So you're right. I mean, it was a coup. There was a movie by Michael Moore called Where to Invade Next, which kind of opened up this idea of coup being a policy that we've started to use. We had a coup in our own country as far as we had a policy coup here, where a certain branch of people that were running things won completely among the Cheneys and the Bushes and the Rumsfelds, where business became war officially. Before that, it was under a veil of morality, where, remember, Desert Storm. We were saving the Kuwaitis. But really, what was the war on terrorism except just pure revenge? It was blood for blood. What do you think about that change? That was a policy coup. Do you agree?
I do.
So, you know, we had that, and now that we had that policy coup here, our new way has been to create actual coups around the world. as a way to affect change of anyone we can't steamroll easily. Now, could we could we fight Brazil? No, because that would require a draft of the United States, and you could never sell a war with freaking Brazil to the U.S. But you could definitely make a political coup happen, and they did. Now, could you get enough people in the U.S. who are at this point completely Islamophobic to fight Iran? Maybe, but Iran's really Persia, and Persia's really been multicultural and multi-religious for a long period of time, so that would be a tough sell. And they're not even able to sell people on ISIS. They just made a ruling that females will be allowed to be drafted, and I didn't see an outcry for that yet. What do you think? Do you think that's coming?
I think it absolutely is.
Talk a little bit more. I mean, you're basically not going to have to worry about being drafted, essentially, unless it gets down to the last reserves, because they usually go for 18, 25, and so on and so forth. The younger people go first. And me too. We're not going to have to worry about being drafted so much. But that it's a sea change. Like, if Hillary gets in and starts telling the women of the country they have to go out and fight and die, that actually tells me the government doesn't not only care about us, but wants to decrease our population, since they want women to go out and fight and die.
It's difficult to argue. I'm not a good teammate tonight. I apologize. Yeah, I have a very dark view of what's happening, and certainly it's difficult to debate the righteousness of drafting women. Why should men be taking all the risk? If you believe in equal rights, isn't this a fair change? Isn't this only just? There's definitely that truth to it.
And we ignore in the under a falsehood of political correctness, we ignore the fact that we would need these young women to produce healthy babies for our next generation. Yet we'd put them in harm's way deliberately. Under patriotism and nationalism. Well, that's it. That is it.
And I was going to talk about restricting abortion rights.
Thanks, everyone.
JJ